We have the annual Hackett review. It's a bit like turkeys and Christmas. You cannot have Christmas without a turkey. And in my experience of many years of going to Shared Services Week, having the Hackett insights is almost a must-see, or a must-listen to, or whatever way you like to see it. And this year, I'm really delighted to have, or to know that Gerald Fass, who is now a group principal with Hackett, is going to be presenting this on behalf of Hackett. I've known Gerald since about 1995, when both of us set off doing a shared services journey. I was working for Whirlpool. Gerald was working for the consulting firm, and the one thing that we found out together is that none of us knew anything about shared services at the time. So it was the blind leading the blind, but you know what? We arrived in the right place. But I have to say, please welcome Gerald. He's one of the top guys in this. He's been around doing shared service and outsourcing for many, many years. He really is a long-term seasoned practitioner. Gerald.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcome, David. When we started these journeys about 20-odd years ago, we were pushing paper. We were doing transitions from Germany, Austria, Switzerland into Dublin. I mean, that was the be-all and end-all. And phase 2 was going to be this futuristic technology called scanning. And if we were lucky, we were going to get some workflow to boot with that. For those of you that remember, we used to have SAP R3 green screen. So this is the prehistory of global business services and shared services. Now, I was told there would be a clicker on here. Naomi? So then the technology didn't work, and it doesn't work either. There you go. What I'm hoping to achieve with you in the short half hour that I have today is give you, first of all, a quick whistle-stop tour of what it is that we are observing. The general idea being that I'll give you a quick state of the nation, which I'll follow by an interesting observation we have made over the last year as we've launched our new study. And then go into more of a bit of a detail around where do we tap new sources of value for GBS and what are some of the leaders doing. Clearly, there's probably more material than we can cover in this half an hour, so please come and find me after, and hopefully we can delve into a little bit more. So first things first, what does the macro situation tell us? What is the context in which we are operating since last year? And what we are seeing is that some of the strategic imperatives, some of the key issues that companies are reporting back to us are pretty much the same. It's about improving customer satisfaction, it's about cost reduction, here's a surprise, and it's about increasing agility. And these are the strategic imperatives that have shown the biggest rises since last year. Now, that means that GBS has a role to play. That means that GBS as a driver for agility is a key player in here. So what have come of some of the themes? What are some of the trends we are seeing? First and foremost, multifunctional GBS, it's here to stay. Right, this is now the norm, and it's end-to-end. We're no longer talking about the single function, accounts payable or just finance. The norm is now to go multifunctional. Interestingly enough, GBS is making an increased contribution towards customer-facing capabilities. And for me, that's a vote of confidence, if there ever was one. From a sourcing perspective, we are seeing the emergence of mixed sourcing models, so captive as well as outsourcing. However, and this is where there's a bit of a paradox which we will be digging into, there's a bit of a disconnect between GBS's ability to deliver against its target, cost, quality, and the stakeholders' perception as to its ability to deliver. So an interesting conundrum we find ourselves into this year. So let's have a quick look. You'll see at the bottom, since 2009, which was the big tipping point from single to multifunction, that trend is now well established. This is now the new normal, as they call it. Multifunction is the way to go. That is what the highest performing companies are doing. Interestingly enough, our peer groups are now catching up. So this is no longer that much of a differentiator for those that want to pursue the higher performance levels. From a service placement perspective, more than 50% of addressable activity, addressable effort, is now in global business services across all functional areas. Obviously, you have the historical usual suspects, finance, HR, but even procurement is now catching up as one of the new drivers towards that performance. Now, even the peer group only has 30%, quote unquote, but still, that is where some of the opportunity lies. And we'll see here some of the usual suspects around what processes are in. Obviously, finance, HR, IT, some of the inbound call center work, they've been there for several years now, and they will probably stay there for a while. Interestingly enough, procurement, direct and indirect, is where many companies are now venturing. And they're not just doing the transactional work, they are going all the way down to sourcing and setting up centers of excellence. They are not just looking at the mechanics, they are looking at the full set of benefits around sourcing, procurement, cash, efficiency, and effectiveness. Interestingly enough, for the first year, we've put in all the management and order-to-cash type processes in here, and it jumps straight into number 7. So for me, that's a vote of confidence in the model. That also means that the foundation for high performance is very well established. From a sourcing perspective, captive in-house shared services is still very much the dominant model. However, we are seeing the emergence of hybrid models as very much the norm. Either because companies have already squeezed as much as they can out of their captive model and want to try to get a bit more, or because they are growing and have other strategic imperatives, or because they want to leapfrog and go faster. And we'll get back to that in a minute. But again, hybrid models and the ability to manage the hybrid models is currently the preferred strategy as reported back to us. However, we are seeing a little bit of a tale of two halves. And this is a paradox which, for the first time, I've been observing. You see, on the one hand, world-class companies are 2.5 times better at delivering the cost and the efficiency benefits that they are targeting. Now, it's not really that much of a surprise. The current economic climate is such that everybody is under pressure, and that is the focus. They're even delivering a little bit better than their peers in terms of quality and effectiveness. Now, the reason why the effectiveness isn't as good as the cost is because the focus on cost, some of the quality has fallen by the wayside. And we are seeing the pendulum swinging now that the cost is being addressed. However, the other part of the story isn't as good because the stakeholders, the C-suite, the less than 50% of the C-suites we have interviewed say that their companies, their GBS organizations are satisfying their need for year-on-year cost savings. So we're not quite sure whether that is indeed born in fact or whether it is just a perception. But there is a disconnect here that needs to be addressed. Because on the one hand, the results are being delivered, and on the one hand, stakeholders are not really saying, hey, let's celebrate, this is really, really good. So we went and dug a little bit more into that. We went and identified what are some of these stakeholder expectations that rank up there. I mean, there's a longer list of these, and these are some of the most important ones. These are the top 5. And you can see those that rank very highly: high quality, cost savings, productivity, operational cost savings. These are very highly rated expectations. However, when you actually measure, is your GBS, is your organization satisfying you with the delivery against those, or are you highly or very highly satisfied with your organization's ability to deliver, you actually get an overwhelming, not really. And the interesting thing is, for the one thing that they are doing very well, it's not rated. The whole compliance thing, it's a given. So there's a bit of a conundrum that we are measuring here in the marketplace. There is a disconnect, and GBS doesn't seem to be delivering. It's falling short from some of these expectations, despite the hard facts on the ground, that it's delivering measurable, tangible outcomes. So where do we go from here? What do we do about this? Tapping new source of values is a way to go. And one way to progress is to make sure you have a very well-structured, a very well-articulated narrative. Something you educate your stakeholders with, something that gives you a clear view of where are you going, what can you expect at each stage, what are you expecting in return, and what is going to happen to get as you go through this, this journey. And we've tried to formalize or normalize this journey in a three-stage model. And we are consultants, so these models, we can't live without them. And this is ours. And actually, this one is born in fact. We actually can measure the number of companies that are at each stage, and I'll show you that in a minute. But at the bottom stage, at the bottom rung, you are seeing the old-style shared services. A bit of accounts payable, offshore, focusing on transaction processing, very much focusing on taking the complexity out, taking the cost out, benefiting from wage arbitrage, benefiting from consolidation effect, and starting to do some work on the process improvement. But also starting to put some of the fundamentals in terms of what we call the core competencies relating to the management of global business services. And then you graduate to more of a stage 2, which focuses on the operating excellence or operational excellence. And the benefit and the value delivered at that stage relates to, obviously, the unit cost reduction. Don't forget, the moment you start delivering a benefit, that becomes a given. You can't escape that. If you're doing a job well, unfortunately, you have to carry on doing it. But then you start focusing more on the service value, and you start becoming more of an end-to-end player. You are starting to have much more of a formalized, very rigorous service management capability. You start becoming much more integrated into your company. And then those that achieve the ultimate, so to speak, those that achieve the most mature type global business services operations have a seat at the table. They are those that are strategic enablers. They are those that have the ability to translate a company's strategic imperative into an execution model that actually will deliver. You will find companies who put very non-traditional type processes in their GBS organizations. Marketing analytics, optimization of what's on the shelves, centers of excellence for all sorts of things which are nowhere near transaction processing. And these organizations are typically large, and they will typically have been operating for quite a long time, but they're also, most importantly, have the ability to deliver a differentiated business outcome. So if you think about a source-to-pay type process, they're able to pursue the efficiency, the effectiveness, the sourcing benefits, the cash benefits, and obviously the procurement mechanics of it as well, because they are very well integrated in their organization. Now, I said earlier that it's important you're able to articulate the narrative of what your journey will be looking like. And each stage of an organization, each stage of a journey like this has a very specific characteristic. Now, again, this isn't meant to be dogmatic, and one size does not fit all. But broadly, one can hypothesize that in the first phase, you would focus on reducing the cost from a functional perspective. It's about transaction quality. It's about the right first time type ratios. It's about input and output optimization. And that allows you to get to that operational excellence level where some companies start pursuing the working capital benefits. Why? Because the upstream components of their processes get straightened out, and therefore they can do much better with that. They will then focus on customer satisfaction much more than at the beginning. And then ultimately, in the ultimate phase, they will start mining the analytics. They will start mining the information that they are generating to the benefit of the business. And that ultimately is where GBS comes into its own. And again, this is born in fact. So you saw the pretty slide before. This one are actually the stats that go behind it. So if I were to call out two topics here, cost reduction in year one is a given, or every time you have a transition, but also year on year. And also at the bottom, for the first time, you can see the ability to deliver business insight, the ability to mine your information, and to really be a business intelligence center, beyond just the process, but to have those analytical capabilities are increasingly important. What I find interesting in this one as well is that it happens increasingly even at stage 1. So companies are starting to think ahead. If I'm going to put in a global business services for whatever function, what are the analytics that will benefit my company as I progress with that? And obviously, as you mature, that becomes very much an end-state strategy. But doing it as an afterthought isn't going to get you there either. So this is what the market looks like. The vast majority of companies, and it's not really a surprise, are actually at stage 1 or stage 2 according to the way we look at the world. It's a very small number of companies that are truly up there. And again, these things are never static, right? Last year's number was 6%. This year's number is 8%. We're not talking about massive swings here, which means that if you were to count, not many people in this room are actually achieving the end state, possibly because we don't have a clear understanding of what the narrative needs to be. How do you break between stage 1 and stage 2? What is that tipping point? Again, it's not formal, but there are certain minimal capabilities, certain things that companies do to get there. So let's dig a little bit into what these things are. If you looked at some of our studies over the last few years, some of these strategies have been there forever. The continuous improvement, the end-to-end process standardizations. The one that I will briefly focus on are at the bottom. Companies do not use labor arbitrage as a primary driver for continuous improvement. There is a realization increasingly in the marketplace that that erodes. It's an established fact. So once you've invested in your global business services organization, what really matters here is how do you optimize your asset? How do you treat your GBS organization as an asset? Obviously, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't ever go and pursue wage arbitrage because things do change and it may be worthwhile. But as a primary driver, that is not where it's going. On the other hand, you'll see increased investment around talent management. People set a shared service center up as part of their network here in Prague. It's a relatively saturated environment. Okay. What are we going to do to differentiate ourselves? What are we going to do to make sure that people want to come and work for us and stay working for us? Interestingly enough, we are seeing a spike of activity around that as a strategy in stage 2. I would have expected that in stage 1, frankly, because you set it up and you want to do it right first time. The reality is you're too busy setting it up, you're too busy stabilizing it, and then you realize, I've got an attrition problem, and then I'm now going to start investing in my employee value proposition. Outsourcing isn't a primary driver either. What we are seeing is that companies do like the value proposition of outsourcing either as a means of leapfrogging or as a means of assuring benefits or reducing time to benefit. Paradoxically, they do like some of the core competencies outsourcing has to offer as opposed to, but in a captive environment. We've called out on 3 core competencies, as we call them. Those things that increasingly companies are focusing on as a differentiator towards high performance. Governance, service management, and enterprise process ownership. So if I quickly dig into that, governance is the means of interacting with your business. It's not just about having the dialogue, it's having the mechanics, the discipline, the information. It's about projecting your intent and having a two-way mechanism for managing your internal and external customers' expectation. So it needs to be comprehensive, it needs to be holistic. It's not just about you versus some local finance controller and then you're done. Those that do this well, and again, we've established that in fact, have an ability to actually own certain aspects of the way they manage their global business services, be it their budgets, be it their service scope changes. And why is that? Because they have a very high quality connection with their business. It's not taken out of their hand. They have the trust of their business, and therefore they have the autonomy and the authority to get some of that stuff done. Process ownership. Now, we've introduced the notion of enterprise process ownership. People talk about global process ownership. The general idea being that you are able to work across boundaries. You are able to work source to pay, record to report across the entire company, beyond all of the divisions that you may be having to work. But in order for that to work, you need to have an organization that has teeth The paper tiger doesn't work. This isn't an administrative layer. This is something that really is differentiated. So 3 questions for you to keep in mind when you do set this up. First of all, what's end-to-end? What is the process breadth? How far and how deep are you going to establish your process ownership structure around? What is the organizational reach? Right? What are the boundaries you want to work across? They could be functional, they could be divisional, they could be a combination of all. And it's important to establish that. And most importantly, what are your decision rights? What are the decision rights of all members of that process ownership? And how do you make that work back to your governance? How do you integrate that? Those that do this right, we have found that they are able to deploy the structured improvement methodologies much better, be it lean, ISO, etc. And we are seeing that the likes of the world-class companies are actually deploying this on a much more regular basis. Last but not least, service management. Now, we all know about service management, but the way we look at it at Hackett is it's a discipline in its own right. It's a process. It's something that lives. Very often, we are finding that companies think about this as an afterthought. They set it up, and then they have one person with a spreadsheet and something, create a dashboard, and they call it service management. Well, actually, when you see here what we are putting forward, it's a cycle. And the way the cycle manifests itself is that companies are actually putting in place the roles that support the service management capability. The world-class companies that we are surveying have in place a bunch of prescriptive roles that are very much in place. Those that do not typically experience a false economy. You know, there's something counterintuitive in we want to be a low-cost organization, so we don't need any of this. Well, actually, you can't stay a low-cost organization if you don't have some of this stuff. So this is not a luxury. And obviously, you don't have to have all of these roles all of the time from the beginning. So you may want to start with a good relationship manager, just to stabilize it. You may want to have a good financial manager to make sure that all of that aspect is properly under control. And you'll see that those that get to stage 3 make an increased investment in that because they have understood that these are some of the core competencies that are absolutely essential to make a global business services thrive. So I probably have 1 minute left. I'm going to leave you with the thought that my personal belief about GBS is they are fantastic animals. One of the reasons I'm still doing this is I'm an entrepreneur in denial. We set these things up as a business, or at least we intend to set them up as a business. We have sky-high expectations on global business services organization. And effectively, we're asked to do the impossible. The service we're meant to be delivering is to be good and fast and cheap and God knows what else. Where in reality, typically, you can pick one of the two of the three at best. So ask yourselves, as if you do have the time to reflect, where do you fit? How is your service? Is it good? Is it fast? Is it cheap? Is it all three? Congratulations, then you probably have achieved the end state. But if not, I know a good consultant who can come and advise you on where to go next. Thank you very much. That's all I have time for. Any questions?
Have we got any questions? Raise your hand. Oh, wait, we've got one back here. Just give me a second while I make my way.
That's typical.
Gerald, it's Dave from HP. You had your three stages on the left-hand side, and you then had the wiggly line going to GBS, top right, 8%. Presumably, the data may be different, but presumably if you were just a single tower, the same principle applies. The left-hand side, the 3 stages are still appropriate, and the relative ratio will be similar.
I can't really hear very well, sorry.
Okay. So your 3 layers,
yeah.
GBS with a wiggly line going top right with 8% operating up there. If you were only single tower and only finance or only HR, presumably you might see
you could apply a similar model, yes, you could apply a similar logic to that. But if you were to apply the model as a purist, if you are a single function shared services organization, we probably wouldn't qualify you as a global business services from that perspective, because, yeah. But the logic is the same in terms of some of the capabilities that one would expect at each stage.
I was just going to ask a question here, but one thing I was just going to try to understand here is that you speak, we all speak of global business services, but actually, is this a stage of development within global business services? So where we're falling down here is the fact that we haven't integrated all of the bits and pieces. Is that the case? So in other words, we have, if you like, lots of different locations where the service is being delivered, but we're not actually integrated, and the bits and pieces are falling down between the cracks.
Yes, so we are seeing quite often companies which have either multiple functions or multiple locations that don't really operate as a network, or you might have a finance tower or a HR tower or a procurement tower, but it doesn't come together as a business services organization. And where it falls down is because of some of these core competencies not being in place, because the strategic intent not being aligned, it falls short from that perspective.
Joel, just a question from me around structure. Where, from your perspective, should the head of GBS lie within the organization?
Yeah.
I guess there's two different thought processes around this. One is that they report into the CFO, that then reports into, obviously, the board and the CEO. The other is they're a peer of the CFO in the executive board. Where do you stand around the structure of GBS and where that GBS head reports?
So this question comes with a health warning, right? We're at risk of arguing religion here, and we probably haven't got time. However, the perspective I like to put forward is, first of all, it will depend on the where you are in the journey. It may require some adult supervision, and therefore it might be the right thing to give that line reporting to the CFO or any other C-suite person. On the other hand, you may want to use it from the beginning. So I know a company which, when they launched GBS, made a conscious decision to apply a board member, to that role specifically from the beginning to send a signal to the organization. So you might start with that, and then it mutates, or you may want to actually say, no, we're going to do it from the beginning.
So then, if you report to the CFO, let's take that example, and it's HR shared services, and you used to report into the HR function, then doesn't that create a disconnect between the HR function and HR shared services?
It could create a disconnect, and that's where some of these core competencies come in. Right? So the whole service management, governance, and some of these core competencies then become the core discipline of what you are doing. That disconnect then needs to be addressed through that. So the example I am mentioning has, it's a board member, and he is responsible for transactional finance, IT, so the CIO reports to him, and procurement, so the CPO reports to him. Right? And that logic is then applied.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was excellent.